Hello everyone. This is the second video lecture of the week, and I would like to talk about the Paleolithic, early Neolithic transition in the prehistoric world, as I promised. And I'd like to discuss a number of questions that were introduced in the first lecture. So we'll go from there. I'm going to start with a chronological story by actually taking you to Europe a little bit, although that's not Western Asia. But a lot of the literature on Paleolithic art, the cave paintings and so on, is really has been on European sort of caves and prehistoric sites. Although these kinds of sites, these kinds of caves also exist in Western Asia, like the Karain cave in southern Turkey, or the Yarumburgaz cave near Istanbul, and so on. But I wanted to be able to talk about cave painting. I wanted to bring some examples from Europe, and then I'll take you, for the early Neolithic, I'll take you to southeastern Turkey in a little bit. Let's look at the chronological sequence here a little bit, and to discuss the chronological scope that we're covering. And so by Upper Paleolithic, I am sort of referring to the sometime between 40,000 and 9,600 BCE, when Europe and the Middle East is covered with glaciers, and what we have is these hunting-gathering groups that are collecting a lot of collecting and gathering wild species, also developing certain sophisticated stone tools, and putting paintings on the walls of caves. These are very, very important, and they're usually not actually used living in caves themselves, but on campsites. Sometimes these are in front of caves. Most of the time it's on a river terrace overlooking a river. So they usually use river environments or marshy environments to actually hunt animals that come to drink water. And so this is really quite important. With the closing, actually, of the glacier period, we see a kind of a really radical change in the climate, with the warming of the climate moving towards the Holocene, starting in 9600 BCE. With rising temperatures, increasingly mild days, mild winters, and humid summers. And the Mediterranean waters are also kind of rising. This provoked the onset of the Neolithic, the Holocene. So the Neolithic is marked by, most importantly, this kind of early steps of the beginning of agriculture, the domestication of wheat and barley, and the sheep and goat. This is the kind of really golden four. We can say sometime later lentils are added to this list, and also cows, cattle, as well. This is a time period we see an extensive use of obsidian trade. We see the art that we know from the cave paintings continue on house walls, interior walls as well, and the figurine culture actually continues with interesting continuities as well. So we will focus on our we'll eventually make it to the Middle East, but I want to talk a little bit about these cave paintings just to give you a sense of what came before, and a lot of these sort of really the most prominent cave paintings that are discussed in art history come from this series of caves on the mountains between France and Spain. Although, as I mentioned, there are similar caves less studied, sort of in the Middle East as well. So in the second half of the lecture, I'm going to take you to the Middle East, to Çatalhöyük, to Göbekli Tepe, and Ayn Ghazal. What is in a cave? So the paintings in the walls of caves on the mountains are really is a very important hallmark of the Paleolithic lifestyles. And recent research on caves has shown, such as the Chauvet cave in France, or the Altamira cave in Spain, has shown that the paintings that are applied on the walls of dark and deep caves have been the work of specialized individuals, not a kind of an idling person just randomly drawing animals on the walls. We are actually talking about a repository of images that are being made by specialists. And that the cave then becomes a space, not as a space of living, everyday living. It's not like you're using this as a house, but you're using the cave as a space of ritual and art making. This distinction for us is very, very important. And that the idea that the cave paintings are not scribblings of an idle caveman, but the work of ritual specialists. This is very, very important. Chauvet Cave in southeastern France, for example, is such an example, such a fascinating example of such a ritual space. And the Paleolithic art gallery of paintings we have dated from about 30,000 to 28,000 BCE. We have a cave here of about 1,300 foot long, about 400 meters, with 950 images on the walls of the caves. And so the paintings on the Chauvet Cave galleries then support one of my first arguments, that the idea is that there is an interest among these prehistoric communities to depict wild and ferocious animals, making the images sort of powerful, potent, apotropaic, and therefore making the spaces of the cave itself efficacious, potent, and divine. And so this scene of horses, for example, horses, rhinoceroses, and aurochs, which is an now extinct species of wild ox. And we see panthers, cave lions, and hyenas as well. They're depicted moving. They're depicted moving across these rock surfaces and sometimes emerging from crevices and nooks of the cave. So the artists are actually using this uneven topography, the cracks of the cave walls, as a way of depicting these animals emerging out of these caves. And radiocarbon dating actually suggests that some of these overlapping images that you see in this scene are actually about 5,000 years apart. So when we're looking at a scene like this one, we're not looking at a tableau that's actually produced in one sitting or within a generation. We're talking about an image-making practice that is dispersed that goes on for 5,000 years of animating and sanctifying the space. This one rock art specialist, David Lewis Williams from South Africa, founder of the Rock Institute at the University of Witwatersrand, studied more recent cave painting practices of South African San peoples based on ethnographic accounts. it suggested that an extraordinary wealth of information goes into this kind of an image making process. And he kind of really outlines for us what does that image making process look like. And this is important, I think, for us. It starts with the acquisition of imagery. How are you going to decide what to draw? And the acquisition of imagery comes through either dreams or particular healing rituals run by ritual specialists or weaving of previous rock art. And then comes the manufacture of paint, the acquisition of the right minerals, the correct minerals from special quarries, and the technological knowledge that's involved in actually going and getting these pigments. And processing them is really important. And oftentimes these kind of ethnographic accounts also pointed that these pigments are mixed with sacrificed animals' blood and actually used within the representation itself. So we're really looking at a very complex technological process. And third comes the making of the rock paintings. Then the paintings are actually applied on the cave walls using the crevices and the topography of the cave wall in a creative kind of way. And really imagining the surface of the cave wall as a kind of a portal into alternative worlds, other worlds, maybe the underworld. And finally, the use of the rock paintings. So once the rock paintings are made, they don't really sit idly as they are, but they are used, they're visited, they're considered potent and powerful because of the materials that are and the rituals that were used to produce them. So going and touching and kind of really interacting and viewing these images are important. We talked about the sight of sight. You also want to imagine these images being viewed in flickering light of torches or candles, something. So the possibility of seeing these images is kind of really it's in a very specific experience. We want to imagine them. So the conclusions actually from David Lewis Williams's findings from the Sunrock art in South Africa is that this created image in the end is not a visual replica of a particular reality. They come from rituals. They come from dreams. But they are considered as a reservoir of power, a potent and magical thing. And secondly, that the images that are produced is a part of a ritual process, and it helps through that ritual process, it helps the community to be transformed either through healing or other processes. So the image making itself cannot be understood as a kind of an afterthought. It is part of the process, and it does make an impact on the real social world. My second argument that I mentioned in the previous video was that this kind of an animal-human hybrids and the creation of monsters was an important aspect of prehistoric imagery. I give you this example, this really excellent example of a lion-human figurine from the Hohenstein-Stadel in Germany. A figure that's about 30 centimeters, so it's a kind of a really tall figure. That is carved out of mammoth ivory. It's about 12 inches tall, and it was carved with a flint stone knife. And so, from the traces that we see, the figurine has a lion's head, but borrows the posture of a human being. So it's really a kind of an interesting hybrid. one author that actually just really spoke about that these animal-human hybrids are often conceived as dangerous. Precisely, they break down the boundaries and question those categories of being human or animal. I also want to jump here and talk about these kind of Paleolithic figurines of nude women, like this famous example from the village of Willendorf in Austria. And this is an Neolithic limestone figurine that dates to the 24,000 to 22,000 BCE and was discovered on a Paleolithic terrace site over the Danube River near the village of Willendorf. Originally, it was colored, it was painted with red ochre, and the figurine is less than 5 inches tall, so you can see someone holding it in their hand. It just fits into the palm of your hand, and it's a voluptuous body with pendulous breasts that are and her arms are actually wrapped around her breasts. She has wide hips and belly with a deep navel, a kind of a clearly marked navel, solid thighs and dimpled knees, and a clearly delineated vagina as well. So, and the head is really quite interesting. It does not present a face, but it's decorated with a pattern, which is really quite fascinating. So, I'd like to wrap up this lecture by talking about the sort of early sites of socialization in Western Asia, and I want to take you to the site of Göbekli Tepe, particularly, which is in southeastern Turkey. This is a site that was recently discovered in the last 20 years or so, and has been excavated by various archaeological teams, and the site has formed a major caused a major excitement. It's located in the modern province of Urfa. So it's a mountaintop sanctuary for gathering and feasting place for hunter-gatherer groups that actually sort of really gathered from this region. And what happened is that they came together and built a series of circular monuments that at the site of this limestone quarry, and during the sort of early years of the Neolithic. So the discovery and excavation of the site in recent decades really created such an excitement and media attention that it is often talked about as the world's first temple, or the site of the birth of religion, as you can see in this kind of Smithsonian magazine and the National Geographic. What really shocked the archaeologists was the monumental architecture at the site, the construction of these monumental sort of semi-subterranean structures that are surrounded by concentric walls, and it's sort of really and its upper structure is held up by these T-shaped monolithic stone pillars. These circular spaces were used for feasting events, and this we know from massive amounts of animal bones with cut marks that are found deposited in these spaces before their burial. Art historians were particularly, and here I'm showing you from the excavation, you can see several of these circular buildings that are built right next to each other on this kind of really mountaintop sort of quarry site. And you can see how they are, in a way, sort of semi-subterranean. They're sunk into the ground, into the bedrock, with concentric walls and these T-shaped pillars. Art historians were particularly excited about these monolithic pillars since they were elaborately carved with visual representations The overall pillars were clearly conceived as human bodies and give way to arms and hands wrapped around them. You can see in these images. And many of the pillars, actually, in addition, had these images of dangerous and ferocious animals that we know from the cave paintings a little bit, such as this kind of roaring lion, a scorpion, a whole series of birds, and we have some kind of decorative, some kind of geometric decoration here as well. And so the bone evidence in these inside these buildings suggests that they were sort of hunting, particularly gazelles, aurochs, wild boar, wild goat, onager, red deer, and fox. And actually only some of these animals, actually very few of these animals, get represented within this within these T-shaped pillars. You can see a wild boar on the left, a fox in the middle. And each building had a life story of about 100 to 150 years before they were buried. When it comes to the representation of humans, which is actually a very rare occasion, we find representation of both males and females, and this small statuette of a male figure with an erect penis, and then this incised representation of a naked woman should be probably really identified as a graffiti because of the way that it was carved, and in this kind of really crouched frontal position, possibly giving birth. And so when scholars have written about this kind of anthropomorphic understanding of these T-shaped pillars as human images, this is really quite fascinating as a kind of an abstraction, and that these stelae are, if we accept these as like human bodies, then we have to expect that these sort of carvings of animals are actually being inscribed on the bodies of these human bodies. This juxtaposition, measuring the human and sort of meshing the human and the animal, really becomes an important aspect of this particular site as well. So I'm hoping that we will have a broader sort of discussion of Göbekli Tepe in our class, and its significance for the prehistory of the Middle East. Thank you.